Hey guys, it's Lisa with Quilting in the Valley. Here we are for episode 4 for Quilting 101, and we're going to do strip piecing today. So you have 4 sets of width of fabric cuts of 4 sets of 3 width of fabric cuts that you're going to make strip sets with. I've already stitched one of them to one pair together so that you don't have to sit and watch me do that. These are just random fabrics. These aren't in a kit anywhere. I'm just using these as an example. Okay, so I sewed my first strip together like this. You can see where I lined them up there. Most fabric doesn't come out exactly the right length. This is the end. Instead of starting here and stitching down, I'm going to turn it around and start where I ended and stitch back to the beginning. The reason I'm going to do that is because your fabric is going to have a tendency in strips to wave. If you sew them all together going the same direction, it'll have a tendency to kind of wave, and then it'll be difficult to get your straight cuts when you go to subcut it. Okay. I don't pin. Sorry. For those of you that want to pin, that's absolutely fine. Make sure you have patchwork pins, and you want the extra fine ones. The reason you want that is because if you're sticking a great big flagpole of a pin through here, you're going to distort your fabric and pull it away. So make sure you're using fine patchwork pins. We carry them. We have magic pins. We have the clover pins. Fine patchwork pins. The glass head clover ones are very nice. So are the magic pins. I don't pin, I just sew a little bit, stop, and adjust. Now I'm coming over here and I'm lowering my 1/4 inch foot. You must have a 1/4 inch foot. If you're going to get into quilting, you have got to have a 1/4 inch foot. So on a 1/4 inch foot, from my needle to the outside edge of the foot is a 1/4 inch. And I can guide, if you want one with a guide, they make them that have a little blade that goes along the side that helps you guide. But I can just guide this fabric right along the edge of that foot and know that I have a 1/4 inch seam. Now, for some practice, before you actually do your strip sets, what you might want to think about doing is get a couple of 2.5 inch strips of fabric, or pieces, 2.5 inch squares, whatever you want to do. Sew them together with your best 1/4 inch seam, and then measure them. So if you think about it, 2.5 inch strips of fabric would be 5 inches wide. You're taking a 1/4 inch off for each seam allowance. That means your resulting seam should be 4.5 inches. So take 2.5 inch squares, sew it together, measure it, and see if you're at 4.5 inches. If you're not, take a look at that 1/4 inch foot and make sure it is a 1/4 inch foot. There are some that are close, but no banana. Or adjust your sewing to make up for that. The other thing that I'm doing right now is I'm using Aurifil thread. Aurifil thread is long staple thread in a 50 weight, which means it's very fine thread. So it's not going to take up a lot of space in my seam allowance. This right here, the orange spool, is Aurifil 50 weight thread. This dove gray color is one of my absolute favorite colors. It's color number 2600. I use this for pretty much everything. It just blends with whatever you've got. Okay, so now I have my strip set. I had already pressed the one pair. Now I want to make sure that my seam allowance for the other one is pressed in the same direction. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to put this on my wool pad, and I'm going to set my seam. So setting your seam just kind of relaxes that fabric where you just pieced it, gets it to where the thread is firmly nested down in there, and it just makes it easier. The one thing that I'm not going to do is I'm not going to iron. I'm pressing. There's a difference. You can distort your fabric. If you do a lot of this business, you can distort your fabric, and what used to be a straight strip is going to end up being wavy. Okay, so I just set my seam, and now I know my seam allowance for this one goes this way, so I want my seam allowance for this one to go this way. I'm going to nudge that open. I'm going to come in with my iron right on that seam, and I'm going to go along and make sure I'm nudging this completely open. If you think about it, if you iron a fold right here in this seam, you're losing the amount of fabric twice that you have in that fold. Once for the bottom of the fold and once for the top of the fold. And that can make a huge difference by the time you get to the end of your quilt. Okay, again, I'm just nudging and pressing. I am pressing on my wool mat, which means I don't have to use any kind of steam or chemicals or best press or anything. I do like to use best press from time to time because of the smell. I love the Caribbean breeze. I think it just smells wonderful. But you don't use it when you use a wool mat. When you use a wool mat, the wool in the mat actually pulls the moisture from the air and your heat, and it holds the heat. So you're pressing your seams from the bottom and the top at the same time with a wool mat. So you get a nice crisp seam. So there we go. Both of my seams are going in the same direction. I have a nice flat piece, and when I come over here, this should measure, if you remember our first, boy, this is hard to read, isn't it? If you remember our first set that we cut was 6.5 inches. So this should be 6.5 inches, and it is. Okay, now the next thing we're going to do is we're going to subcut this. So you're going to do this 3 or 4 times. You have 4 sets of these. You're going to do this.
Having trouble there?
I'm having trouble here. You have to be smarter than the packaging. We had to get a new rotary cutter out. We lost our rotary cutter, so we had to get a new one.
And why do we like that one, Lisa?
So I like this one because this blade is not going to cut me. Until I push that handle, the blade does not come out. It also feels a little nicer. The handle, you can see, is slightly angled. So remember I told you guys you want to make sure your wrist is straight and you're pushing it ahead of you. This feels better to do that with, as opposed to some of the ones with that kind of stocky handle that you kind of have to, it's weird.
And then you never have to worry about leaving your blade open.
Leaving your blade open, you never do. Okay, so you have 4 sets of these 3 fabrics. It is critical that on these 4 sets of 3 fabrics, you put the pieces in the same order. So if the blue one is in the middle, the blue one always needs to be in the middle on all 4 of your strip sets. Then you're going to, because the ends are not even, because we went from one direction one way, the other direction the other way, you're going to go ahead and cut off one end to make it nice and even. And then you're going to do 6.5 inch, just like we did for the focal print. You want 6.5 inch squares. So you're going to subcut. Subcut means that you have your big long piece, and we're mowing outside. You guys can hear that. You had your big long piece, your strip set that we put together, and now we are subcutting that strip set. 6.5 inches. You're going to cut all 4 of your strip sets exactly the same way. Make sure they're pieced the same way. Make sure before you start cutting, make sure your seams are all pressed really well so that you don't have any little boo-boos when we get down to it, because you want to make sure everything matches up.
Do they ever need to re-straighten up the edge, Lisa?
Oh, absolutely. So as you can see what I'm doing, I'm not using my mat because this particular mat is not really great with the ruler. The measurements are a little off. So I'm not using my mat. I'm using my ruler, and I'm putting my ruler in here. Since I'm using my ruler, it doesn't make any difference, you know, where the fabric is on the mat. Here's my ruler. I'm at that 6.5, and I'm squared off on my ruler. But there might be a time where, you know, maybe your strip goes off the reservation, and if that's the case, just get it back to your iron and press it until it's right back where it needs to be. Okay, so you're going to do this 4 times. You're going to have 4 strip sets make absolutely sure that the same fabric is in the middle, and the other two fabrics will fall into place. It doesn't matter, because you can just turn it around if it doesn't come out right. But you need the same fabric in the middle on all 4 strip sets. Press them, don't iron them, press them really well with your seams going in the same direction. Make sure you come out at a 6.5 inch width of strip set, and then subcut your strip sets into 6.5 inch squares, which we will then start to put together with our accent fabric squares next time.
Lisa, do they need to match their thread?
No, absolutely not. If you're using a good needle, so y'all should have Microtex needles, I think we've established that. And look at this dove thread that I use, dove colored. I mean, that just disappears. You don't see that. So you would have to put a fortune into thread if you wanted to, so you'd have to have blue on this side and orange on this side, and no, you don't want to do that. Get you a nice neutral thread. Here are a collection of neutrals. I like that dove gray. I think it just disappears, but any of these would do. I wouldn't use this one if you were using white. So if you're doing white, you probably want to have white thread. But anything else, these just blend. And then you don't have to worry about changing thread. And you don't have to worry if your bobbin's this color and your top thread's this color. It doesn't matter. It'll just blend. You're not going to see that thread. But we do recommend the Aurifil. Okay.
Fabrics?
Fabrics, we have some new fabric choices for you. We have got a Christmas one for people who are asking for a Christmas one. So here are your, no, I'd probably do it with the green in the middle. There's your strip set. Here's your stopper border, and here is your accent fabric. So that's our Christmas one. This is a Benartex fabric line. And then, and then we came up with this fun one. This would be a nice guy quilt. So there's your strip set. Here's your accent fabric. It's all camping gear related. And then here is your stopper border, which is this guy right here. And we'll show you guys the Halloween one. The Halloween one is, there's your strip set, there's your stopper border, and this is our fun accent fabric. So those are our 3 new options for Quilting 101. If you are just getting started, you can grab one of those and catch up with us. The quilt itself, just to remind you guys, is this one right here. Pretty decent size for sitting on the sofa with.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. All right, we'll see you again next time when we start putting the quilt top together. See you then.